Canada is on the defense again over its defense spending targets. This week in Brussels, Defense Minister Bill Blair said the country is on track to meet NATO's targets soon, thanks to boosting investments in the Arctic.
We've begun the important processes of acquiring the additional capabilities that we require and that we require to meet NATO's requirements of us. And so we are proceeding with those. I believe it brings us inevitably to over 2% of defense spending, but I've got some work to do in order to be able to articulate that both to my own country and to our allies.
For months, Canada has faced increasing public pushes from allies to at least chart a path to reach its NATO defense spending commitment of 2% of GDP on defense. The federal government's long-awaited defense policy review, released in April, does lay out a plan to reach 1.76% of GDP on defense by 2030, but there's still no target date to hit 2%. This week, the Business Council of Canada issued a public letter to the Prime Minister saying Canada faces, quote, diplomatic isolation without a timeline. The pressure is also growing ahead of next month's NATO's Leaders Summit in Washington as the alliance celebrates its 75th anniversary. Chief of the Defense Staff, General Eyre, who's set to retire this summer, is with us in studio now. Hi, General Eyre. It's good to see you. Thank you very much for making the time.
Vashti, it's good to see you as well.
You've been in the job now more than 3 years, and I'm wondering from where you sit, how much less secure the world is now than it was when you took the position.
Well, we're seeing a very concerning confluence of stressors in the security environment. Geopolitical, climate change, technological acceleration, societal discord. And so all of those combined make for a very unpredictable, uncertain future going forward. You know, we see the geopolitical tensions that are out there with the increased cooperation of Russia, of China, of Iran, of North Korea, violent extremist organizations that are not going away. And so the demand signal on us, your Canadian Armed Forces, is only set to increase.
And I do want to ask you about what that means kind of moving forward. But when you talk about all the different pressure points, is it your view, does it feel, I guess, having been in this position, this unique position that so few Canadians have occupied, that the world is less secure now than it was back in 2021?
Absolutely. The feeling is visceral. And when I travel around the world to other countries that are closer to conflict zones, Eastern Europe comes to mind, the sense amongst their population is just that intense feeling of insecurity. And we here in Canada are somewhat isolated with 3 oceans and a superpower to the south, but the world is becoming increasingly smaller, and incidents, activities, events on the other side of the world are having a more immediate effect here. You know, I think we as a country need to realize that perhaps our greatest national interest, prosperity of our citizens, is predicated on stability and certainty in the international order. Well, that international order is under threat like it hasn't been since the end of the Second World War. And so we have reason to be concerned.
Do you think Canadians are concerned enough?
I think what we need in this country is more of a national security dialogue, more people talking about what the unfolding events around the world and here at home actually means, and what that means for our own military and our other institutions of national security.
We're talking kind of big picture, global picture. Let's narrow it down to Canada, and specifically the way, through your experience over the last 3 years, you now view the chief threats to this country. How would you describe them? What are they for Canadians listening right now?
Yeah, so I've got a new favorite word, and it is polycrisis. So crises stacked upon crises. And that has been the experience during my tenure as your Chief of Defense Staff. But what are the greatest threats to our country? Well, there's a number of them. You know, I think one of our greatest national security objectives needs to be avoiding great power war. And in today's day and age, that is done through deterrence. You know, we're facing adversaries whose strategic culture is such that they respect force. They respect hard power. We need to coexist, but coexist from a position of collective strength. And what we've got going for us in this country is our competitive advantage is being part of a group of like-minded or like enough-minded allies, partners, friends who can group together, who can cooperate together. And to do that, we need to pull our weight.
I want to ask you about that. You heard the introduction, because when we talk about the collective strength of organizations like NATO or alliances like NATO, I have conducted in the past number of months a number of interviews in which people in very important positions, like the head of NATO, like the U.S. ambassador to this country, like the U.S. ambassador to NATO, have singled out the fact that our country has not charted a path to 2%, and now it remains the only ally to be in that position. Is that a defensible position from where you sit?
So from my perspective, I do not defend that, and nobody in uniform defends that. That is very much a political decision. And indeed, that is what I've been calling an input metric. And I'm much more concerned about what output metrics are. And in our case, that's capabilities and readiness. Readiness to confront the threats that are out there. So we need to do a threat-based approach.
Are we ready to counter those threats?
At this point, no. The military that we have right now is not ready to counter the threats that we see coming. And that's why implementing this policy update with a sense of urgency is absolutely what is required. As we take a look at the threats out there, they are increasing. If we take a look at what we've been calling peak threat from both Russia and China, that's going to peak sometime at the end of this decade, beginning of next decade. We need to make sure that we've got peak deterrence in place by that time, collectively, and that's why a sense of urgency is just so important.
Is it your view that that sense of urgency exists? I heard you talk about the strategy employed by the overall defense policy that was put forward. Mm-hmm. I remember covering the last one, and implementation is an issue.
Yes.
I think it's fair to say that sense of urgency wasn't applied in the last case. Do you have any faith or any reason to believe it will be this time?
Well, we are doing everything we can to ensure we have that sense of urgency, to keep pushing as hard as we can. The security of the nation demands it.
How do Canadians square that with the fact that there are budget cuts to the Department of National Defense, something that you testified before committee? You know that it generated headlines, the government countered, tried to say many times, no, there isn't cuts, we're just reprofiling. Like, how are Canadians supposed to reconcile a lack of readiness, an urgency with which you say the government should be acting, with cuts to the Department of Defense?
So to unpack that one a little bit more, there's three big buckets of money. You've got personnel, you've got capital, and you've got operations and maintenance. And so the cuts last year came in the O&M, the operations and maintenance. Our defense spending is actually going up, but it's more focused on the capital side. And so the funding that came with our new defense policy covers a part of the O&M cuts from last year, not fully. And so we are still working through that as to how we maintain readiness as we get new capabilities in, as we deal with aging capabilities that have to be maintained for some time until they're replaced. And there's no simple one-size-fits-all solution for it, so it's a fair bit of work.
Do you believe the government should be spending more on the defense of this country?
Yes. And every predecessor in this job would have said the same thing. The fact is, there is no commander in history who have said they have had enough to deal with the threats in place. But that being said, the threats that we are facing, the convergence of those threats makes it a very concerning future going forward. But at the same time, despite those threats on the horizon, we need a sense of confidence, a sense of self-confidence. I was in Normandy last week for the 80th anniversary, and I was reflecting on that period. We have a country that is capable of doing great things. And if you take a look at what the Canadian troops did in Normandy, on the ground, in the air, at sea, it was remarkable. And so you compare us to many other countries around the world. We have strengths that we can draw upon.
That's the note to leave it on. General Eyre, I appreciate your time very much. Congratulations on your long and storied career, and thanks for making the time for us.
Thanks, Vashi.